The call that changed everything. Officer Ben Carson hadn't expected much from his shift on a hot Thursday afternoon. Patrols in his district were typically quiet. A few minor disturbances, maybe the occasional traffic stop. He drove the squad car slowly, his eyes flicking from the cracked sidewalks to the rows of aging houses, many in disrepair. He glanced at his partner, Liz, who sat next to him with a look of mild boredom. "Anything interesting on the docket today?" she asked, squinting against the bright sun. "Not unless you count Mr. Finch's missing cat," Ben replied with a smirk. They'd spent the morning coming through Mr. Finch's backyard for his beloved tabby, only to find it lounging in a neighbor's garden. Just as Liz was about to respond, their radios crackled to life with a static-filled message. The dispatcher's voice broke through, sounding urgent. "All units near Oak Hill and Harrison, we've received a distress call from a young boy." He sounded frightened, said, "Help, please. Can't get out," before the line went dead. Last ping places it around 1920 Willow Street. Ben and Liz exchanged a quick glance. Willow Street was just a couple of blocks away. "Dispatch, this is Unit 403. We're heading to 1920 Willow Street now," Ben replied, already flipping on the siren. He pressed the gas pedal, and the car lurched forward, navigating through the sparse midday traffic. As they neared the address, the houses looked even more neglected. Faded paint peeled away, windows sagged, and overgrown lawns whispered of abandonment. Ben's heart thudded with a vague sense of dread. The dispatcher hadn't mentioned any names, but something about the call nagged at him. "Wonder what we're walking into," Liz muttered, reaching instinctively toward her holster. "No idea," Ben replied, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling building in his gut. When they arrived, the house at 1920 Willow was a shadow of its former self. The roof sagged, the wooden steps creaked under the weight of neglect, and the entire property seemed to exude a quiet sorrow. "Looks abandoned," Liz noted, scanning the surroundings. "Dispatch, this is Unit 403. We're at the location. No immediate signs of life. We're investigating further," Ben reported before exiting the car. As he approached the front door, he noticed a single, small handprint on the dusty glass of the door. It was faint, but it looked recent. Liz knocked, her fist hitting the door firmly. "Police, if anyone's inside, please come to the door," she called out. Silence. Ben moved closer, pressing his ear against the door, straining to catch any sound from within. Nothing. His stomach twisted. Something was wrong. He tried the doorknob. Locked. Liz motioned toward the side of the house. "Let's check around back," she suggested. They moved cautiously, stepping through a yard littered with discarded toys. A cracked toy car, a dirty soccer ball, and a stuffed bear missing one eye. Each item felt like a clue, pointing to a family, or at least a child who had once lived here. Ben bent down, picking up the stuffed bear, his fingers tracing the tear along its arm. He remembered a similar toy he'd given his own son, Dylan, years ago. The thought struck a nerve, and he set the bear back down with a sigh. When they reached the back door, they found it slightly ajar. Ben pushed it open slowly, peering inside. The air was thick and stale, carrying an overpowering smell of mildew and something more acrid. "Police," he called out. "We received a call from this address. If anyone's in here, we're here to help." A faint, muffled sound came from somewhere deep within the house. It was barely audible over the creaks and groans of the aging structure. Ben's pulse quickened, and he looked back at Liz, who nodded her understanding. They moved deeper into the house, past piles of forgotten belongings, through rooms cluttered with old furniture, and finally down a narrow hallway that led to a closed door at the end. The muffled sound grew louder, now unmistakably a voice, a child's voice. Ben's heart pounded as he reached for the doorknob. It turned, and he pushed the door open to reveal a small room with a single thin mattress on the floor and scattered toys surrounding it. In the corner, huddled with his knees drawn to his chest, was a little boy no older than 7. The child's face was streaked with dirt, and his clothes hung loosely, as though he'd been wearing the same outfit for days. His eyes, wide and fearful, looked up at Ben and Liz as they entered. For a brief moment, Ben felt his heart drop into his stomach. The boy's face looked hauntingly familiar. Ben crouched down slowly, careful not to startle the boy. "Hey there, kiddo," he said softly, keeping his voice calm and steady. "We're here to help. Are you okay?" The boy stared at him, his lips quivering as though he was struggling to speak. Ben noticed the faint bruises around the boy's wrists, the way his thin frame shook, and a haunted look in his eyes. "What's your name, buddy?" Ben asked gently. The boy's voice came out in a whisper, almost too faint to hear. "Mikey." The name hit Ben like a punch to the gut. He felt a strange, sinking sensation. "Mikey? Mikey Carson?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The boy nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor. A wave of recognition washed over Ben, leaving him momentarily speechless. He hadn't seen his son in 2 years, not since his ex-wife had moved to another city, taking Mikey with her. The last time he'd seen his son, he'd been a healthy, cheerful 5-year-old. Now Mikey looked almost unrecognizable, frail, malnourished, and scared. What happened?" Ben managed to choke out, his voice thick with emotion. Mikey didn't answer, his small frame shuddering as he clutched his knees tighter. Liz placed a gentle hand on Ben's shoulder, grounding him. "We need to get him out of here, Ben. He needs medical attention." Ben nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Yeah, you're right." He reached out, lifting Mikey into his arms, his heart breaking as the boy flinched slightly at the touch. He held him close, whispering reassurances as they made their way back through the house, each step feeling heavier than the last. As they emerged into the bright afternoon sunlight, the familiar sounds of a neighborhood stirred to life around them. Neighbors peered out from windows, murmuring amongst themselves. Ben ignored them all, focused solely on the boy in his arms. "Dispatch, this is Unit 403. We have a child in need of immediate medical assistance at 1920 Willow Street. Requesting an ambulance. Over." Liz spoke into the radio, her tone steady. Ben held Mikey tightly, rocking him gently as they waited for help to arrive. The weight of guilt and relief swirled within him, fighting for dominance. Guilt for not being there, for letting so much time pass since he'd last seen his son. Relief that he'd found him before it was too late. When the ambulance finally arrived, Ben rode with Mikey to the hospital, his hand never leaving the boy's. He watched as the paramedics worked around him, taking vitals, whispering reassurances, but nothing could ease the fear etched into Mikey's eyes. Uncovering the truth. The emergency room was bustling as Ben carried Mikey through the entrance, cradling him protectively against his chest. Nurses and doctors moved around them, setting up equipment, assessing other patients, and rushing to various stations. Ben held Mikey's small hand, feeling the tremor in his son's fragile grip as they waited. Dr. Evelyn Marks, a seasoned pediatric specialist, approached Ben with a clipboard in hand. Her calm demeanor and gentle eyes were a welcome sight in the chaos of the emergency room. "We'll take good care of him, Officer Carson," she assured him, glancing at Mikey with a look of concern. "Right now, we need to run a few tests and get him checked out. I promise I'll keep you updated." Ben nodded, reluctantly loosening his grip on Mikey's hand. "Mikey, these doctors are going to help you, okay? I'll be right here, just outside." Mikey's fingers tightened briefly around Ben's before releasing. His wide eyes stayed locked on his father's until the doctor guided him toward a stretcher. Ben stood back, watching as they gently laid his son down and wheeled him out of sight. His heart felt like it was being torn in two. The urge to follow Mikey was nearly overpowering. Liz appeared beside him, placing a supportive hand on his shoulder. "You okay, Ben?" He took a shaky breath. "I can't wrap my head around it. Liz, how did he get here? Why was he in that house? Last I knew, he was with his mother in Jacksonville. Liz nodded sympathetically. It doesn't add up. Did you notice the bruises? The stake he's in. Something terrible happened to him, Ben. We'll get to the bottom of it. The hours in the waiting room crawled by it at an agonizing pace. Every time the door to the ER swung open, Ben's heart skipped a beat, but no one came to update him. The minutes stretched into hours, and still, there was no word. Ben paced the hallway, replaying every moment of the day in his mind. Every possible clue that might explain how his son had ended up in that desolate house. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Marks appeared, her face etched with both exhaustion and grim determination. "Officer Carson, we need to talk," she said, gesturing for Ben to follow her into a quiet room nearby. Liz trailed behind, sensing Ben's need for support. Dr. Marks took a seat, consulting her clipboard before meeting Ben's gaze. "Mikey is stable, but he's severely malnourished and dehydrated. The bruises on his wrists and ankles suggest he was restrained at some point. We've documented several recent injuries, likely inflicted over the past few weeks." Ben's fists clenched, a storm of emotions raging within him. How long? How long has he been like this? "From what we can tell, he's been in this condition for a few weeks, maybe more," Dr. Marks replied, her expression sympathetic. "He's also showing signs of severe emotional trauma. We're going to need to approach this carefully, both physically and mentally." The weight of her words sank heavily on Ben's shoulders. He had missed so much of Mikey's life since the divorce, forced to watch from the sidelines as his ex-wife moved further away, making visitation nearly impossible. But he had never imagined that his son would end up in a nightmare like this. "Can I see him?" Ben's voice was barely above a whisper. Dr. Marks nodded. "We'll take it slow. He's resting right now, but you can sit with him. He's asked for you." Ben's heart clenched as he entered Mikey's room. The sight of his son, frail and pale against the white hospital sheets, made his chest ache. Mikey's eyes fluttered open when Ben sat beside him, a weak but genuine smile spreading across his face. "Dad," he murmured, reaching out with one small, trembling hand. "I'm here, buddy," Ben whispered, taking Mikey's hand gently. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." They sat in silence for a moment, with Ben stroking his son's hair gently, the soft hum of hospital equipment the only sound. He was afraid to push Mikey, but he needed answers. "Mikey, can you tell me what happened? How did you end up in that house?" Mikey's eyes flickered, and he shifted uncomfortably. "Mom took me to live with a friend," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "She said it was just for a little while." Ben's grip tightened on Mikey's hand, anger bubbling up within him. "And then, what happened after that?" The boy swallowed, his gaze drifting to the wall. "Mom never came back. Her friend, he didn't let me leave. He said she was going to pick me up, but she never did." A knot formed in Ben's stomach. Did he hurt you, Mikey?" Mikey didn't answer, but the haunted look in his eyes said more than words ever could. Ben's jaw clenched as he fought back a surge of rage. Whoever had done this would pay. As Mikey drifted into a fitful sleep, Liz, who had been watching quietly from the doorway, entered the room. She placed a gentle hand on Ben's shoulder. "We're going to investigate this thoroughly, Ben. We'll start by tracking down his mother." Ben nodded, his expression hard. "She'll have to answer for this. But right now, Mikey's my priority." Over the next few days, Ben barely left his son's side, watching over him as he recovered. The doctors and nurses worked tirelessly, ensuring Mikey received the care he desperately needed. And slowly, bit by bit, Mikey's physical health began to improve, but Ben could tell that his son's spirit had been deeply scared. On the third day, as Mikey was eating a small meal of mashed potatoes and vegetables, Ben finally asked the question that had been nagging at him. "Mikey, do you remember anything else about the man who kept you in that house?" Mikey's hand stilled, his fork hovering over his plate. He had a beard. and he smelled funny, like smoke. His brows knitted as he struggled to recall more details. He called me the little brat, and got mad when I made noise. Ben's fists clenched. Every word from Mikey painted a clearer picture of the horror his son had endured. He forced himself to keep his voice steady as he spoke. "Mikey, you're safe now. That man can't hurt you anymore." A hesitant look crossed Mikey's face, as though he wanted to ask something but was afraid. Ben noticed and offered an encouraging nod. Will you stay with me, Dad?" Mikey's voice was barely above a whisper, his eyes wide with vulnerability. Ben's heart ached as he reached out, squeezing Mikey's hand gently. "I promise, buddy. From now on, I'll be here. I'll never let anyone hurt you again." That evening, Ben met with Liz and a detective from Child Protective Services. They shared what little information they had gathered about Mikey's mother. She had fallen into a rough crowd, known for her involvement with a local gang, and had recently been seen with a man who matched the description Mikey had given. Her boyfriend, from what we understand, is a known felon with a record of assault and drug possession. The detective explained, "She's been in and out of the system, and it appears she's recently moved from her last known address. We're putting out a bulletin for her, but it could take some time to track her down." Ben's hands trembled as he took in the news. His son had been abandoned to strangers, left in a house of neglect and abuse, while his mother disappeared into a world of crime. A mixture of fury and heartbreak swirled within him, but he kept his focus on one thing: keeping Mikey safe. The detective leaned forward, his voice low. "Ben, I know this is personal for you, but it's essential to follow protocol here. We'll bring in the right people to question Mikey, therapists who can gently help him remember details. He's young, and he's been through a lot. We need to be careful." Ben nodded, though his instincts screamed to track down everyone involved and demand answers. "I understand, but I want to be a part of this investigation. No one's going to hurt my son again." The detective agreed, and they mapped out the next steps to locate Mikey's mother and bring charges against anyone responsible for his suffering. Over the next week, Ben stayed close to Mikey, who slowly began to open up more about the ordeal. Little by little, his son shared fragments of the nightmare he had lived through. Each piece of information fueled Ben's determination to bring justice to his son and ensure he would never experience such horror again. One afternoon, as Mikey was working with a child therapist, Ben's phone buzzed with a message from Liz. "We found her. Mikey's mom was picked up 2 towns over. You'll want to be here for this." Ben's hand clenched around the phone, a grim satisfaction filling him. Justice was finally in reach. He looked back into the room where Mikey was smiling faintly at the therapist's soft-spoken jokes, the spark of hope returning to his eyes. Ben knew that from this moment on, his sole mission was to rebuild the pieces of his son's life and shield him from the darkness he had endured. Confrontation and revelations. Ben stood in the interrogation room, staring at the one-way mirror as he waited. His breath felt heavy with anticipation, a mixture of dread and simmering anger as he prepared to face her. After days of agonizing wait, he was finally going to confront his ex-wife, April. She had been arrested in a small town 2 hours away, caught with a group of petty criminals in a rundown motel. The image of Mikey, frail and trembling, chained in that squalid house burned in Ben's mind. The questions he had long buried rose to the surface, demanding answers. The door creaked open, and a detective led April into the room. She looked far different from the woman Ben had once known. Her once vibrant eyes were now hollow and bloodshot, her face gaunt and tired. She barely met Ben's gaze as she sat down, hands cuffed to the metal table. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick, weighed down by years of bitterness, heartbreak, and now, betrayal. "Why, April?" Ben's voice was low, almost a whisper. "Why did you leave him there?" April scoffed, though her voice cracked. "I didn't leave him there. It was supposed to be temporary." "Temporary?" Ben's anger flared, his fists clenching at his sides. You abandoned him in a filthy, decaying house with strangers. He was chained up like an animal. April flinched but quickly looked away, her expression hardening. I thought he'd be safe there, with Danny. He said he'd look after him while I figured things out. Ben struggled to contain the fury rising within him. You thought he'd be safe. Safe? Do you have any idea what he went through? He was terrified, starving, neglected, and you thought he was safe. Don't you dare lecture me, April shot back, though her voice lacked conviction. You don't know what it was like. The money, the pressure. I was doing the best I could, Ben. You weren't there. Because you wouldn't let me be there. Ben's voice shook with emotion. Every time I tried to see him, you blocked me, made excuses. You kept him from me. And this is what he suffered for it. April's face twisted in a mixture of guilt and defiance. Danny said he'd help us, that he'd give us a place to stay and a fresh start. But things didn't go the way I planned. So you left Mikey there and ran off to live with a gang of criminals? Ben asked, his tone sharp with disgust. That's your idea of a fresh start? April's resolve crumbled, and she lowered her gaze, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't know it would end up like this. The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking into the air between them. Ben watched her, searching for any sign of remorse, any hint of the woman he once loved. But the years had worn her down, and whatever love or goodness she once had seemed buried beneath layers of regret and poor choices. He took a slow, steadying breath, forcing himself to focus on the reason he was here. What do you know about Danny? He asked, his tone icy. Where can we find him? April looked up, her expression guarded. I don't know where he is. We lost touch a few weeks ago. Don't lie to me, April, Ben warned, his voice low and menacing. If you ever cared about Mikey, even a little, you'll tell me everything you know about Danny and where he might be. April's shoulders slumped, and she hesitated before speaking. Danny, he was bad news. I didn't see it at first, but he started changing. Started talking about ways to make money, things that didn't sit right. He said he'd look after Mikey, but then he started getting paranoid, said he couldn't trust anyone. I left because I didn't want to be there when things went south. So you left your son with a man you knew was dangerous, Ben said, his voice hollow. April looked away, her face pale. I thought he'd be okay for a little while, until I could come back. Ben stood there, staring at the broken shell of the woman he once knew. The depth of her betrayal was staggering, and he could feel his anger morphing into a cold, unyielding resolve. If Danny was out there, if he was still a threat to his son, Ben would find him and bring him to justice. The door opened, and the detective entered, signaling the end of the interrogation. Ben gave April one last, piercing look before turning to leave. The rage and heartbreak in his chest burned hotter with every step, each stride fueling his determination. In the hallway, Liz was waiting for him, a look of concern etched on her face. How did it go? Ben shook his head, his expression hard. She didn't give me much. Danny's a drifter, no fixed address. But he's dangerous, Liz. And if there's even a chance he might try to come back for Mikey. Liz placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. We'll find him, Ben. We're putting out an APB, circulating his description, and checking every known associate we can find. If he's out there, we'll bring him in. Ben nodded, but his mind was already racing, thinking of ways to keep Mikey safe, to shield him from the horrors of his past. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Mikey was released from the hospital and placed in temporary protective custody, while Ben worked with his lawyer to secure custody rights. The process was grueling, complicated by April's legal issues and the lack of clear documentation. But Ben was relentless, fighting with every resource he had to bring his son home. One evening, as Ben and Liz combed through a pile of records on Danny, a lead came through. A witness had reported seeing a man matching Danny's description at a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. Ben's pulse quickened as they sprang into action, coordinating with a team of officers to plan the operation. They arrived at the motel just after sunset, the dim light casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. Ben's nerves were taut as they approached the manager's office, flashing their badges and demanding information on Danny's room. The manager, a weary-looking man with a grizzled beard, pointed to a room at the end of the hall. "He's been in there a few days. Keeps to himself mostly. You guys planning to bring him in?" Ben nodded, his jaw clenched. "That's the plan." They moved quietly down the hall, positioning themselves on either side of the door. Ben motioned for the team to be ready, his hand hovering near his weapon. He nodded to Liz, who gave the door a hard, decisive knock. "Police, open up," she called. For a moment, there was silence. Then the sound of shuffling inside, a scrape as if furniture was being moved. Ben's heart pounded as he gestured for his team to brace themselves. "Last warning. Open the door." Liz called again. When there was no response, Ben signaled the team, and with a swift kick, the door flew open, revealing the dark, cluttered room. Danny was standing near the back, his hands raised defensively, a sneer twisting his face. All right, no need to get all dramatic," he muttered, his gaze darting around the room. "Danny Moore, you're under arrest for child endangerment and other charges pending investigation," Ben announced, his voice steady. Danny laughed, though it was hollow. "Oh, come on, I was just looking out for the kid. He was a handful, you know." Ben's anger flared, and he took a step forward. "Looking out for him? You kept him chained up, malnourished and terrified. That's not looking out for anyone." Danny shrugged, a twisted smirk on his face. "The kid's mother said she'd be back. I was just doing her a favor." "Save it for the judge," Liz said sharply, cuffing him and leading him out of the room. As they escorted Danny to the squad car, Ben felt a sense of grim satisfaction. This man would never be able to hurt Mikey again. But the ordeal wasn't over. There was still the trial, still the long road of healing for Mikey, who would need all the support and love Ben could give him. Later that night, Ben sat by Mikey's bed, watching his son sleep peacefully for the first time since he brought him home. The room was quiet, a comforting stillness settling over them. For the first time, Ben allowed himself to hope, to believe that they could move forward, rebuild, and find peace. A new beginning. Ben felt a new weight of responsibility as he navigated the days following Danny's arrest. The legal paperwork to finalize custody was in progress, but the bigger challenge lay in helping Mikey adjust to his new life. The boy's spirit, once bright and playful, had been dimmed by fear and neglect. Ben knew he couldn't erase the trauma his son had endured, but he was determined to do everything in his power to rebuild Mikey's sense of safety and trust. Mikey's first night in his new home was a restless one. Ben had prepared a room for him, complete with a new bed and fresh linens. He had found a few stuffed animals and toys, things he remembered Mikey liking when he was younger, hoping they would bring some comfort. But as the night deepened, Mikey struggled to settle in, his small frame tense, and his eyes darting around as if expecting a shadow to emerge from the corners of the room. Ben stood in the doorway, watching his son with a heavy heart. It pained him to see the fear that lingered in Mikey's every movement, the way he seemed braced for something terrible. Taking a deep breath, Ben stepped into the room and sat down beside Mikey on the bed. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "Is there anything I can do to make you feel more comfortable?" Mikey looked up at him, his wide eyes filled with a mix of uncertainty and hope. "Will you stay here with me, Dad, just for a little while?" "Of course," Ben replied, his heart swelling with both sorrow and love. He reached out and took Mikey's hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "I'll be right here." As the minutes passed, Ben held his son's hand and told him stories from when he was younger, memories of fishing trips, lazy Sunday mornings, and playing catch in the park. Slowly, he could see Mikey's shoulders begin to relax, the lines of tension in his face easing as he listened. By the time Mikey drifted off to sleep, Ben felt a surge of gratitude. It was a small victory, but it meant the world to him. For the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope that they could build a new life together, one where Mikey would feel safe, loved, and free from the shadows of his past. The following morning, Ben was up early, cooking breakfast and preparing for their first day together. He had taken a leave of absence from work, knowing that he needed to devote his time to helping Mikey adjust. When his son wandered into the kitchen, still rubbing the sleep from his eyes, Ben greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning, champ. How do pancakes sound?" Mikey's face lit up, and Ben felt his heart swell with relief. It was the first genuine smile he had seen from his son, and he savored the moment. "Pancakes sound really good," Mikey said shyly, taking the seat at the table. As they ate, Ben made a point to ask Mikey about his interests, the things he liked to do, the activities he wanted to try. He listened carefully, picking up on every little detail, hoping to learn more about the son he had missed for so long. Mikey was still hesitant, his answers brief and guarded. But Ben was patient, knowing that trust couldn't be built overnight. He kept the conversation light, gently encouraging his son to share without pressing too hard. After breakfast, they went out to the backyard. Ben had set up a small garden area with a few potted plants and some basic gardening tools. He remembered Mikey's fascination with nature and thought a simple project might be a good way to engage him. "Want to help me with these plants?" Ben asked, handing Mikey a small watering can. "I thought we could make this a little garden of ours." Mikey took the watering can, eyeing the plants with curiosity. He knelt down, carefully pouring water onto each plant, his expression softening as he focused on the task. Ben joined him, pointing out the different types of plants and explaining how they needed sunlight, water, and care to grow strong. As they worked side by side, Ben noticed Mikey becoming more relaxed, his small shoulders losing some of their tension. The boy's guarded exterior began to melt away, replaced by a quiet curiosity and a tentative trust. Over the next few weeks, this routine became their sanctuary. Each morning, they would tend to their garden together, talking about everything and nothing. Slowly, Mikey began to open up, sharing bits and pieces of his experiences, his fears, and even his dreams. One morning, as they knelt in the garden, Mikey looked up at his father, his voice barely a whisper. "Dad, do you think I'll ever feel normal again?" Ben's heart ached as he heard the question, the weight of Mikey's pain etched into those simple words. He placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder, his voice filled with compassion. "Mikey, I can't imagine what you've been through, and I know it's going to take time. But I promise you this, I'm here for you every step of the way. You're not alone, and you never will be." Mikey looked up at him, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Thanks, Dad." In the evenings, Ben introduced Mikey to some of his favorite childhood activities. They played board games, watched animated movies, and even set up a tent in the backyard for a campout under the stars. Ben wanted to give Mikey a taste of the simple joys he had missed, to show him that there was light beyond the darkness he had known. Each night, as they lay under the blanket of stars, Mikey would talk a little more, sharing stories from his past and the memories he cherished. One night, as they watched the constellations twinkle overhead, Mikey turned to his father with a shy smile. "Do you think we could go fishing sometime?" he asked, his voice filled with a cautious hope. Ben's heart swelled with pride. "Absolutely, champ. We'll make it a tradition, just you and me." The following weekend, they set out for a small lake nearby, their fishing year in tow. Mikey was hesitant at first, his steps tentative as they reached the edge of the water. But as they cast their lines into the lake, he began to relax, his face lighting up with excitement whenever he felt a tug on the line. They spent the day together, laughing, talking, and bonding in a way that felt both familiar and new. For Ben, It was a reminder of the simple joys of fatherhood, of the bond that no amount of time or distance could erase. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the water, Mikey turned to Ben with a look of quiet gratitude. "Thanks, Dad. This was really fun." Ben smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "Anytime, buddy. We'll do this as often as you want." Back at home, they settled into their new routine, each day a step forward on the road to healing. Mikey still had his moments of fear, times when the memories crept back and cast a shadow over his happiness. But with each passing day, those moments grew fewer and farther between. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Mikey turned to Ben with a look of quiet determination. "Dad, I think I'm ready to go back to school." Ben felt a surge of pride, knowing how much courage it took for Mikey to say those words. "If you're ready, then we'll do it together. We'll take it one day at a time, and if you ever feel overwhelmed, you just let me know, okay?" Mikey nodded, his eyes filled with a newfound strength. "Okay." The next morning, Ben drove Mikey to school, his hand resting reassuringly on his son's shoulder. As they approached the entrance, Mikey looked up at him, a mixture of excitement and nervousness in his gaze. "You'll be here when school's over, right?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ben smiled, giving his son a reassuring nod. "Always, buddy. I'll be right here, waiting for you." As Mikey walked into the school building, Ben watched him go, his heart swelling with pride. This journey wasn't over, and there would still be challenges ahead. But for the first time, Ben felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that they were moving forward together. Mikey was no longer alone, and neither was he. They had each other, and that was more than enough. Facing new challenges, the first week back at school was a whirlwind for Mikey. Although he was excited to be around kids his age again, the crowded hallways and bustling classrooms brought back waves of anxiety. The smallest things, a loud bell, a group of students laughing, the rush of footsteps echoing in the hallway, triggered memories he wished he could forget. Every afternoon, Ben waited for him at the school entrance, his presence a steady reminder that Mikey wasn't alone. They would go for ice cream or walk to the nearby park, where Mikey could talk about his day if he wanted to, or simply enjoy the quiet comfort of his father's company. By the third day, Mikey began to open up more, sharing small details about his classes and the kids he was slowly getting to know. Ben listened attentively, offering gentle encouragement and praise. But he could tell that Mikey was struggling, his eyes shadowed with a heaviness that hadn't been there before. One evening after dinner, Ben noticed Mikey lingering by the back door, his expression thoughtful. "Something on your mind, buddy?" Ben asked, joining him outside on the porch. Mikey hesitated, his gaze fixed on the stars. I just feel different from everyone else," he said quietly. Like I don't fit in." Ben's heart ached at the vulnerability in his son's voice. He knelt down beside him, resting a hand on Mikey's shoulder. "You know, everyone feels like that sometimes. But you're not different, Mikey. You're brave, you're kind, and you've been through a lot. That doesn't make you less, it makes you stronger." Mikey looked up at him, his eyes reflecting a glimmer of hope. Really, Ben replied firmly. "And if you ever feel out of place, remember that I'm right here, cheering you on." Encouraged, Mikey tried to settle into his routine at school, making small strides each day. He bonded with a few classmates, including a boy named Sam, who shared his love for soccer. They would often kick a ball around after school, laughing as they practiced tricks and tried to score goals against each other. It was a small joy, but for Mikey, it felt like a huge step forward. However, not everyone was as welcoming as Sam. A group of older boys had taken notice of Mikey's quiet, reserved nature, and they saw him as an easy target. They would make snide remarks, mimicking his quiet voice or blocking his path in the hallway. At first, Mikey tried to ignore them, brushing off their taunts and avoiding their stares. But one afternoon, As he was heading to lunch, the situation escalated. He was walking alone through the hallway when he felt a sudden hard shove from behind. Stumbling forward, he barely managed to catch himself before he hit the ground. Laughter erupted behind him, and he turned to see 3 older boys smirking, their expressions mocking. "Where do you think you're going, scaredy cat?" one of them sneered, stepping closer. Mikey's heart raced as he clutched his backpack, his mind flashing back to the dark, cramped room where he had once been trapped. The memories flooded over him, overwhelming his senses, and he felt his breathing quicken, panic rising within him. "Leave me alone," he managed to whisper, his voice trembling. But the boys just laughed, one of them grabbing the strap of his backpack and yanking it. "What's the matter? You gonna cry?" Mikey's vision blurred, and he struggled to hold back tears. Just then, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Hey, leave him alone." It was Sam, standing a few feet away, his face red with anger. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Mikey and the bullies. The boys exchanged glances, their smirks fading as they realized they were outnumbered. "Whatever," one of them muttered, shoving Mikey's backpack into his hands before walking away with the others. As soon as they were gone, Mikey slumped against the wall, his body shaking. Sam placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, concern etched into his expression. "You okay, Mikey?" he asked softly. Mikey nodded, though his throat felt tight. "Thanks, Sam. I didn't know what to do." "That's what friends are for," Sam replied with a reassuring smile. "If those guys give you any more trouble, just let me know. We'll take them on together." Later that day, Ben noticed something different when he picked Mikey up from school. His son's usual quiet demeanor was tinged with a lingering sadness, a look Ben had come to recognize all too well. He waited until they got home, giving Mikey time to unwind, before gently approaching the subject. "Rough day at school?" Ben asked, handing Mikey a glass of water as they sat together in the living room. Mikey hesitated, fidgeting with the glass. "Just some older kids. They were mean." Ben's heart sank, but he kept his expression calm. "Want to tell me what happened?" After a pause, Mikey recounted the incident, his voice wavering as he described the bullying and how it had brought back memories he tried so hard to bury. Ben listened quietly, letting his son share without interruption, offering only a comforting presence. When Mikey finished, Ben placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Mikey, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. But I want you to remember something. What those boys said doesn't define you. You're strong and brave, and you stood up for yourself by not letting them get to you." Mikey looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "But I was scared, Dad. I couldn't even say anything." "Being scared doesn't make you weak," Ben said softly. "What matters is that you didn't let them break you. And Sam standing up for you. That shows that you're not alone. You've got people who care about you." Mikey nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly as he absorbed his father's words. For the first time, he felt a sense of strength he hadn't realized he had, a resilience that went beyond the fear he carried. In the days that followed, Ben noticed a change in Mikey. His son seemed more confident, walking a little taller, even speaking up more in class. Sam remained by his side, their friendship growing stronger with each passing day. And while Mikey still faced challenges, he began to tackle them with a quiet determination, a newfound belief in his own strength. One evening, as they were getting ready for bed, Mikey approached Ben with a thoughtful expression. "Dad?" he began, his voice hesitant but steady. "What's up, buddy?" Ben replied, setting aside the book he'd been reading. Mikey shifted nervously, his eyes earnest. "Do you think I could help other kids someday? Kids who feel like I did?" Ben felt a swell of pride and admiration for his son. "I think you'd be amazing at that, Mikey. You understand what it's like to feel scared, to feel different. You could make a big difference in someone's life." Mikey smiled, a spark of purpose lighting up his eyes. "Maybe when I get older, I could talk to kids, tell them that things can get better. "That's a wonderful idea," Ben said, his heart full. "And you don't have to wait until you're older, you know. You're already doing that, just by being brave and kind. You're an inspiration, Mikey." Mikey's smile grew, and for the first time, Ben saw a glimpse of the unburdened, joyful child he'd always wanted his son to be. As the months passed, Mikey continued to grow and thrive, his resilience shining through in every new experience. With Ben's unwavering support, he faced each day with a strength that belied his years, learning to trust in himself and those who cared for him. His friendship with Sam blossomed, and together they'd formed a small but tight-knit group, helping each other through the ups and downs of school life. One afternoon, after a particularly challenging math test, Mikey and Sam sat together at lunch, talking and laughing about their answers. Mikey glanced around the cafeteria, spotting a younger boy sitting alone at a nearby table, looking lost and nervous. Mikey nudged Sam, nodding toward the boy. "Hey, do you think we should invite him to join us?" Sam grinned, nodding. "Yeah, why not?" They stood up and walked over to the boy's table, introducing themselves and inviting him to sit with them. The boy's face lit up, and he eagerly followed them back to their table, his shyness quickly melting away in the warmth of their welcome. As they laughed and chatted, Mikey felt a quiet sense of pride. He had come a long way from the scared, lonely boy he had once been. And now he was becoming the friend he had once needed, offering others the kindness and support he had so longed for. Later that evening, as he shared the story with Ben, his father looked at him with pride and love. "You're an incredible young man, Mikey," Ben said, his voice full of emotion. "You've been through so much, and yet here you are, making a difference in the lives of others." Mikey smiled, his heart filled with a newfound purpose. With his father by his side, he knew he could face whatever challenges lay ahead, one day at a time, embracing the future together. Months passed, and each day brought Mikey closer to healing. He had found a rhythm at school, developed lasting friendships, and with his father's unwavering support, was beginning to feel a sense of belonging and strength. His relationship with Ben had grown deeper, their bond built on trust, love, and the silent understanding of all they had been through together. One chilly autumn afternoon, as they returned from a soccer game, Ben noticed Mikey seemed quieter than usual. They walked side by side, kicking fallen leaves and enjoying the brisk air, but Ben could tell there was something on his son's mind. "Everything okay, Mikey?" he asked, gently nudging him. Mikey nodded, then hesitated. "Dad, do you think I'll ever really feel like I belong? Like, not just here, but with you?" Ben stopped walking and turned to face him. "Mikey, you belong with me. You're my son, and nothing can change that. I know things have been tough, and you've been through a lot, but you don't ever have to question if you belong. I'm here for you always." Mikey looked down, scuffing his shoe against the pavement. "I guess sometimes I just feel like maybe it's my fault. Like maybe if I had done something differently." Ben's heart clenched. Kneeling down to meet his son's gaze, he spoke softly but firmly. "Mikey, none of this was your fault. None of it. You were a kid in a hard situation, and you did everything you could to survive. If anything, I'm the one who feels like I could have done more to protect you." Mikey's eyes widened. "But you saved me, Dad. You were there when I needed you most." Ben felt a surge of pride and love for his son. "And I'll always be here. No matter what happens, we're in this together." Mikey gave a small smile, the warmth of his father's words settling into his heart. "Thanks, Dad." They continued their walk home in comfortable silence, each step lighter than the last. That night, as they sat down for dinner, Ben noticed Mikey glancing at a flyer he had picked up from school. The paper was bright and colorful, covered with pictures of kids volunteering at a community center. "What's that you've got there?" Ben asked. Mikey looked up, his face lighting up with excitement. "It's a flyer about volunteering at the community center. They're looking for kids to help with a tutoring program for younger students. I was thinking, maybe I could try it. Ben's heart swelled with pride. I think that's a fantastic idea, Mikey. You'd be great at it. Mikey smiled, a mixture of excitement and nervousness in his eyes. I want to help other kids, kids who might feel alone, or like they don't have anyone. Ben reached across the table, giving his son's hand a reassuring squeeze. You're going to make a big difference, Mikey. I have no doubt about that. The next week, Mikey began volunteering at the community center after school. The program paired older students with younger ones who needed help with their homework or just someone to talk to. Mikey's patience and quiet kindness made him a favorite among the younger kids, and he quickly became a role model for them. He saw pieces of himself in each of them: the shy girl who struggled with reading, the boy who had trouble making friends, the kids who were just looking for someone to listen. One day, as he was helping a young boy named Lucas with math, Lucas looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. "Why do you help us, Mikey?" Lucas asked, his voice small. Mikey paused, considering the question. "Because I know what it feels like to need help," he said softly. "And I want you to know that there's always someone who cares." Lucas nodded, his face thoughtful. "I'm glad you're here, Mikey." Those words stayed with Mikey as he continued volunteering. Each day, he felt a little stronger, a little more certain of himself. Helping others gave him a sense of purpose, a way to turn his painful past into something meaningful. And each day, he shared his experiences with Ben, who listened with pride and admiration. One evening, as they were having dinner, Ben handed Mikey a small envelope. Mikey looked at it curiously, turning it over in his hands. "What's this?" "Open it and see," Ben said, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Mikey carefully opened the envelope, pulling out a handwritten letter. His eyes widened as he read the first few lines. "Dear Mikey, we would like to recognize your commitment and dedication to helping others in the community." It was a letter from the community center, thanking Mikey for his service and inviting him to a special ceremony to honor the young volunteers. Mikey looked up at his father, his face alight with surprise and pride. "Dad, they're going to recognize me." "They sure are," Ben replied, beaming. "They see what I see, a kid who's strong, kind, and capable of making a real difference." On the day of the ceremony, Mikey felt a mix of excitement and nerves as he stood among his fellow volunteers. The room was filled with families, community leaders, and the kids he had helped over the past few months. When his name was called, he walked up to the podium, his heart pounding. He looked out at the audience, his gaze landing on his father, who was watching him with pride. For a moment, Mikey felt overwhelmed by the journey that had brought him here, the fear, the struggle, the painful memories. But as he looked at his father, he felt a calm strength settle over him. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady. "I never thought I'd be standing here today. A while ago, I felt alone and scared, like there was no way out. But I learned that even when things are hard, there are people who care, people who want to help. And now, I just want to be that person for someone else." The audience erupted into applause, and as Mikey stepped down from the podium, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had found his voice, his purpose, and he knew that this was only the beginning. That night, as they drove home, Ben glanced over at his son, a look of pride in his eyes. "You did an amazing job up there, Mikey. You've come so far." Mikey smiled, a quiet confidence in his expression. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad. Thank you for everything." Ben reached over, giving his son's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "It's been my honor, Mikey. I'm so proud of you." As the months turned into years, Mikey continued to thrive, his past no longer a burden but a source of strength. He became a leader in his community, known for his kindness and resilience, inspiring others with his story. And through it all, Ben remained by his side, watching with pride as his son blossomed into a young man filled with compassion and purpose. They built a life together, one filled with laughter, love, and shared dreams. And every now and then, when the memories of darker days crept back, they faced them together, stronger and closer than ever. One evening, years later, as they sat together watching the sunset, Mikey turned to his father, a contented smile on his face. "Dad, do you remember that day you found me?" Ben nodded, his heart heavy with the memory. "I'll never forget it." "Neither will I," Mikey said softly. "But I'm glad, in a way, because it brought us here, to this life, to you and me." Ben's throat tightened, and he pulled his son into a hug. "I'm glad too, Mikey. More than you'll ever know." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over them, Ben felt a profound sense of peace. Their journey had been filled with hardship, but they had found their way through, side by side. And now, they were ready to face whatever the future held, together.